Hi, I'm Rashonda Cade. This is Reading with Rashonda. We are reading The Marrow of Tradition by Charles Chesnutt. We are on the second part of chapter 2. I'm going to reread a little bit of where we finished off last time, and then we're going to keep on going. All right, the beauty of the flowers, observed old Mr. Delamere with sententious gallantry, is reflected upon all around them. It is a handsome company. Mrs. Ochiltree beamed upon the table with a dry smile. I don't perceive any effect that it has upon you or me, she said. And as for the young people, handsome is as handsome does. If Tom here, for instance, were as good as he looks, you flatter me, Aunt Polly, Tom broke in hastily, anticipating the crack of the whip. He was familiar with his aunt's conversational idiosyncrasies. If you are as good as you look, continued the old lady with a cunning but indulgent smile, someone has been slandering you. Thanks, Aunt Polly. Now you don't flatter me. There is Mr. Ellis, Mrs. Ochiltree went on, who is not half so good looking, but as steady as a clock, I dare say. Now, Aunt Polly, interposed Mrs. Carteret, let the gentleman alone. She doesn't mean half what she says, continued Mrs. Carteret apologetically, and only talks that way to people whom she likes. Tom threw Mrs. Carteret a grateful glance. He had been apprehensive with the sensitiveness of youth, lest his old great-aunt should make a fool of him before Clara's family. Nor had he relished the comparison with Ellis, who was out of place anyway in this family party. He had never liked the fellow who was too much of a plotter and a prig to make a suitable associate for a whole-souled, generous-hearted young gentleman. He tolerated him as a visitor at Carteret's and as a member of the Clarendon Club, but that was all. Mrs. Ochiltree has a characteristic way of disguising her feelings, observed old Mr. Delamere with a touch of sarcasm. Ellis had merely flushed and felt uncomfortable at the reference to himself. The compliment to his character hardly offset the reflection upon his looks. He knew he was not exactly handsome, but it was not pleasant to have the fact emphasized in the presence of the girl he loved. He would like at least fair play and judgment upon the subject left to the young lady. Mrs. Ochiltree was quietly enjoying herself. In early life, she had been accustomed to impale foods on epigrams like flies on pins to see them wriggle. But with advancing years, she had lost in some measure the faculty of nice discrimination. It was pleasant to see her victims squirm, whether they were fools or friends. She is making them squirm. Hang on, my halo looked a little askew. Okay. Even one's friends, she argued, were not always wise and were sometimes the better for being told the truth. At her niece's table, she felt at liberty to speak her mind, which she invariably did, and with a frankness that sometimes bordered on brutality. She had long ago outgrown the period where ambition or passion or its partners, envy and hatred, were springs of action in her life, and simply retained a mild enjoyment in the exercise of an old habit with no active malice whatever. The ruling passion merely grew stronger as the restraining faculties decreased in vigor. That's funny to me. The ruling passion merely grew stronger as the restraining faculties decreased in vigor. That speaks to a lot of people as they get older. They lose some inhibitions and they will tell you what is on their minds. A diversion was created at this point by the appearance of old Mammy Jane, dressed in a calico frock with clean white neckerchief and apron, carrying the wonderful baby in honor of whose naming this feast had been given. Though only 6 weeks old, the little Theodore had grown rapidly, and Mammy Jane declared was already quite large for his age and displayed signs of an unusually precocious intelligence, as everybody who loves a baby has ever said. But it was true when I said it about my babies. So there is that. I'll keep on reading. He was passed around the table and duly admired. Clara thought his hair was fine. Ellis inquired about his teeth. Tom put his finger in the baby's fist to test his grip. Old Mr. Delamere was unable to decide as yet whether he favored most his father or his mother. The object of these attentions endured them patiently for several minutes and then protested with a vocal vigor which led to his being taken promptly back upstairs. Whatever fate might be in store for him, he manifested no sign of weak lungs. Sandy, said Mrs. Carteret when the baby had retired, Pass that tray standing upon the side table so that we may all see the presents. Mr. Delamere had brought a silver spoon, a literal silver spoon. I mean, I actually understand that spoons were made of silver and things, even though back then a silver spoon was still hoity toity, but like a literal silver spoon. Mr. Delamere had brought a silver spoon and Tom a napkin ring. Ellis had sent a silver watch. It was a little premature, he admitted, but the boy would grow into it and could use it to play with in the meantime. It had a glass back so that he might see the wheels go round. Mrs. Ochiltree's present was an old and yellow ivory rattle with a handle which the child could bite while teething and a knob screwed on at the end to prevent the handle from slipping through the baby's hand. I saw that in your cedar chest, Aunt Polly, said Clara, when I was a little girl, and you used to pull the chest out from under your bed to get me a dime. You kept the rattle in the right-hand corner of the chest, said Tom, in the box with the red silk purse from which you took the gold piece you gave me every Christmas. A smile shone on Mrs. Ochiltree's severe features at this appreciation, like a ray of sunlight on a snowbank. Aunt Polly's chest is like the widow's curse, said Mrs. Carteret. I'm sorry. Aunt Polly's chest is like the widow's cruse, said Mrs. Carteret, which was never empty. Or Fortunatus's purse, which was always full, added old Mr. Delamere, who read the Latin poets and whose allusions were apt to be classical rather than scriptural. So both of those allusions, the widow's cruse, I'm pretty sure refers to the widow in the Bible who only had a coin to give. Oh, no. Wrong story. Widow's cruse is the widow in the Bible who had a cruse of oil that stayed full and always gave her just enough oil that she needed. My bad. And then Fortunatus's purse, which was always full, is a reference to a Latin poem, which I assume I have likely read at some point in my life, but I don't remember anything about it. But we get the point. Aunt Polly's chest was always full of treasures for the young people in her life that she loved. All right, we'll keep going. It will last me while I live, said Mrs. Ochiltree, adding cautiously, but there'll not be a great deal left. It won't take much to support an old woman for 20 years. Mr. Delamere's man Sandy had been waiting upon the table with the decorum of a trained butler and a gravity all his own. He had changed his suit of plain gray for a long blue coat with brass buttons, which dated back to the fashion of a former generation, with which he wore a pair of plaid trousers of strikingly modern cut and pattern. With his whiskers, his spectacles, and his solemn air of responsibility, he would have presented, to one unfamiliar with the Negro type, an amusingly impressive appearance. I wonder why amusingly impressive. But there was nothing incongruous about Sandy to this company, except perhaps to Tom Delamere, who possessed a keen eye for contrasts and always regarded Sandy in that particular rig as a very comical darky. Like, I mean, I get it. We're talking plaid pants, modern cut, brass buttons, whiskers, spectacles. He probably does look like super interesting to gaze upon, but he's also in the best that he has. To Tom Delamere, he looks like a very comical darky, which brings to mind for me blackface minstrelsy or minstrelsy, something I'm interested in. But anyway, it was a form of theater where typically white men would blacken their faces and act in a comical way in their interpretations of how Black people acted. It was a super popular form of entertainment in the US for quite some time. So we'll keep reading. It is quite prudent, Mrs. Ochiltree, suggested the major at a moment when Sandy, having set down the tray, had left the room for a little while, to mention in the presence of the servants that you keep money in the house. I beg your pardon, Major, observed old Mr. Delamere with a touch of stiffness. The only servant in hearing of the conversation has been my own, and Sandy is as honest as any man in Wellington. You mean, sir, replied Carteret with a smile, as honest as any Negro in Wellington. I make no exceptions, Major, returned the old gentleman with emphasis. I would trust Sandy with my life. He saved it once, at the risk of his own. No doubt, mused the major, the Negro is capable of a certain dog like fidelity. Sorry, I had a moment. I'm reading what's on the page. I'm going to keep going. No doubt, mused the major, the Negro is capable of a certain dog like fidelity. I make the comparison in a kindly sense, a certain personal devotion, which is admirable in itself and fits him eminently for a servile career. I should imagine, however, that one could more safely trust his life with a Negro than his portable property. I'm going to keep reading, y'all. I'm going to keep reading. This is Charles Chesnutt. I don't know exactly where it's going, but I don't need to be caught up in this representation of people that was accurate, that makes me unhappy. And I'm not saying it's accurate for every single person because people are people and different, but those sorts of attitudes toward Black people were prevalent. Very clever, Major. I read your paper and know that your feeling is hostile toward the Negro, but the major made a gesture of dissent, but remained courteously silent until Mr. Delamere had finished. For my part, the old gentleman went on, I think they have done very well, considering what they started from and their limited opportunities. There was Adam Miller, for instance, who left a comfortable estate. His son George carries on the business, and the younger boy William is a good doctor and stands well with his profession. His hospital is a good thing, and if my estate were clear, I should like to do something for it. So this is the William we were talking about earlier in the novel, who's a doctor, a Black man who's a doctor, and he's married to the half sister of Mrs. Carteret. And here, um, who's talking? Delamere is talking, not Carteret. Yeah, the half sister of Mrs. Carteret, but Delamere is talking, and he's saying that this guy is a good guy and he's a good doctor, and if I weren't in debt, I would donate to his hospital. All right, let's keep going. You are mistaken, sir, in imagining me hostile to the Negro, explained Carteret. On the contrary, I am friendly to his best interests. I give him employment. I pay taxes for schools to educate him and for courthouses and jails to keep him in order. I merely object to being governed by an inferior and servile race. So Carteret is saying, no, no, I am doing everything that is in the best interest of the Negro people, and that's employing them only in the ways that I want them to be employed. That is servile to me. That is paying taxes for schools to educate them only in the way that I want them to be educated, which is less well than I am educated, and paying for courthouses and jails to keep them in order, all because he objects to being governed by an inferior and servile race. Come on, Mr. Carteret. I feel like I want you to do better, but we're going to keep reading. Mrs. Carteret's face wore a tired expression. This question was her husband's hobby and therefore her own nightmare. Moreover, she had her personal grievance against the Negro race, and the names mentioned by old Mr. Delamere had brought it vividly before her mind. I'm sure they did. She had no desire to mar the harmony of the occasion by the discussion of a distasteful subject. Mr. Delamere, glancing at his hostess, read something of this thought and refused the challenge to further argument. I do not believe, Major, he said, that Olivia relishes the topic. I merely wish to say that Sandy is an exception to any rule which you may formulate in derogation of the Negro. Sandy is a gentleman in ebony. Okay, so Delamere is like, whatever rules you come up with for Black people, Sandy is a true gentleman. He just happens to be ebony. Which isn't bad, right? Like I tried to go on, y'all. I did. That's not bad. I'm not mad at that. Like right now, I feel like Delamere is an ally. And don't we all want allies? But I also feel like that's the being the exception. Um, Maybe other Black people are like that, but this one Black person is great. Like that's like saying, "Oh, I know this. I have this one Black friend," or as people have said to me, in not trying to be offensive, "Oh, I don't think of you as Black." Really? Because perhaps you should. What do you think of me as? Um, so I'm gonna keep reading and scratching my chin. Literally, I'm scratching my chin. All right. We only got a page and a half left. We're doing this, y'all. I mean, of chapter 2. Clearly, we've got a lot of book left. Tom could scarcely preserve his gravity at this characterization of Old Sandy. Remember, he thought Old Sandy looked like a comical Negro. So Tom could scarcely preserve his gravity at this characterization of Old Sandy with his ridiculous air of importance, his long blue coat, and his loud plaid trousers. That suit would make a great costume for a masquerade. He would borrow it sometime. There was nothing in the world like it. Well, Mr. Delamere, returned the Major good-humoredly, no doubt Sandy is an exceptionally good Negro. He might well be, for he has had the benefit of your example all his life. And we know that he is a faithful servant. But nevertheless, if I were Mrs. Ochiltree, I should put my money in the bank. Not all Negroes are as honest as Sandy, and an elderly lady might not prove a match for a burly Black burglar. So now Sandy is a burly Black burglar, or people Sandy knows who he's going to tell about Mrs. Ochiltree's money in her chest are burly Black burglars. And he didn't say, no doubt Sandy is an exceptionally good person. He said, no doubt Sandy is an exceptionally good Negro. As far as Negroes go, I suppose he's fine. But remember, he's still a Negro. Should you talk about where you keep your money in front of strangers? No, it's a bad idea. But his problem wasn't that it was a stranger. It was that it was a Black servant. Thank you, Major, retorted Mrs. Ochiltree with spirit. I'm not yet too old to take care of myself. That cedar chest has been my bank for 40 years, and I shall not change my habits at my age. At this moment, Sandy re-entered the room. Carteret made a warning gesture which Mrs. Ochiltree chose not to notice. I've proved a match for 2 husbands, and am not afraid of any man that walks the earth, black or white, by day or night. I have a revolver and know how to use it. Whoever attempts to rob me will do so at his peril. After dinner, Clara played the piano and sang duets with Tom Delamere. At 9 o'clock, Mr. Delamere's carriage came for him, and he went away accompanied by Sandy. Under cover of the darkness, the old gentleman leaned on his servant's arm with frank dependence, and Sandy lifted him into the carriage with every mark of devotion. Ellis had already excused himself to go to the office and look over the late proofs for the morning paper. Tom remained a few minutes longer than his grandfather, and upon taking his leave went round to the Clarendon Club, where he spent an hour or 2 in the card room with a couple of congenial friends. Luck seemed to favor him, and he went home at midnight with a comfortable balance of winnings. He was fond of excitement and found a great deal of it in cards. To lose was only less exciting than to win. That sounds like a problem. Of late, he had developed into a very successful player, so successful indeed that several members of the club generally found excuses to avoid participating in a game where he made one. Thus ends chapter 2 of The Marrow of Tradition by Charles Chesnutt. This is Reading with Rashonda, and I'm Rashonda Cade. Until next time.